Sherlock Holmes and the Man with Two Faces. Chapter 1. The Phantom of Blackthorn Manor. It was on a dreary November afternoon in the year 1893 that I found myself once more a spectator to one of those singular episodes which so frequently punctuated the career of my remarkable friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A persistent drizzle had descended upon London, reducing Baker Street to a quagmire of mud and mist, the gas lamps flickering like pallid sentinels against the encroaching gloom. Holmes, in one of his restless moods, had been pacing the length of our sitting-room, his violin silent upon the table, his keen mind evidently starved for stimulation. It was in this atmosphere of stifled energy that our visitor arrived, a man whose appearance and tale would prove as shrouded in mystery as the fog-bound streets below. The doorbell's jangle startled even Mrs. Hudson, whose tolerance for irregular hours was by now well seasoned. Moments later, she ushered into our rooms a gentleman whose bearing and attire spoke of aristocracy, though his countenance told a far darker story. Sir Reginald Blackthorne, for so he introduced himself with a stiff bow, was a man in the grip of profound terror. His face, though handsome in a gaunt, angular fashion, bore the pallor of a spectre, his eyes sunken and shadowed as though sleep had long abandoned him. His black frock coat, though finely tailored, was wrinkled and spattered with mud, his cravat askew, and his hands, which trembled as he removed his gloves, were those of a man acquainted with recent violence. "Mr. Holmes," he began in a voice hoarse with strain, "I have come because I am quite convinced I shall be murdered, or worse, condemned as a murderer unless you intervene. There is another me," he said, his voice trembling with each word. Holmes, who had been regarding our client with the dispassionate scrutiny of a biologist examining a rare specimen, now leaned forward in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "A doppelganger, Sir Reginald?" he said, his tone curious yet sceptical. "The notion is ancient, yet seldom substantiated. Pray, illuminate us." The baronet sank into the proffered armchair, his fingers knotting and unknotting as though wringing the truth from the air itself. "For 3 months, since my return to Blackthorn Manor in Yorkshire after a decade abroad, there have been occurrences," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Servants swear they see me in corridors I never walked. Valuables vanish from locked rooms. Livestock are mutilated in the fields. And now—" Here his voice faltered, his gaze dropping to the Persian rug beneath his boots, which Holmes had been studying with peculiar intensity. "Now," Holmes interjected smoothly, "there has been a death." Sir Reginald flinched, as though struck. "4 days past, my head stable hand, a loyal man named Briggs was found in the hayloft with his throat slit," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "The villagers are convinced I did it. They claim to have seen me fleeing the scene, yet I was miles away at the time consulting my solicitor in York." I confess that I was entirely skeptical and inclined to attribute everything to natural causes. "My dear sir, the strain of such accusations alone might conjure phantoms," I said, attempting to offer a rational explanation. "Are you certain these sightings are not merely the product of overwrought nerves?" Our client turned to me with a look of mingled desperation and defiance. "Doctor, I should have doubted myself as you do, were it not for this," he said, producing a folded sheet of newsprint from his coat pocket. It was a crude sketch from the Whitby Gazette depicting a man unmistakably resembling Sir Reginald, his face contorted in a snarl, fleeing a burning barn. The caption beneath read, "Blackthorn Fiend Strikes Again." Holmes, meanwhile, had risen silently and begun circling Sir Reginald like a hawk, his eyes darting from the man's mud-caked boots to the faint yellowish stain upon his gloves. Abruptly, he plucked the right glove from the baronet's hand and held it to his nose. "Opium," he declared, his tone sharp. "Of a peculiarly acrid variety smoked in the dens of Limehouse. Curious habits for a gentleman lately returned from India, perhaps? The tan upon your wrists suggests recent exposure to tropical sun, though your face has since paled. As for your boots—" Here, Holmes seized one foot and tilted it upward, revealing a clump of reddish soil clinging to the heel. "Ah, this is the distinctive ferrous clay of the Yorkshire moors, still damp from yesterday's rain. You have ridden hard to reach us, Sir Reginald. Your horse, I perceive, is tethered downstairs, its left foreleg favouring a stone bruise." The baronet gaped. "This is witchcraft, Mr. Holmes," he exclaimed, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Merely observation," Holmes said coolly. "But let us return to your other self. Has this double spoken left any tangible evidence beyond hearsay?" "Tangible enough," Sir Reginald exclaimed, his voice rising. He produced a handkerchief from his sleeve, unfurling it to reveal a pearl cravat pin, its tip stained brown. "This was found clutched in Briggs's hand," he explained, his voice trembling. "It is mine, a gift from my late father. Yet I swear upon my mother's grave it was locked in my dressing-case when the murder occurred." Holmes took the pin, examining it through his lens. "The blood is recent," he said matter-of-factly. "You have, of course, the key to this case." "On my person at all times," Sir Reginald replied firmly. "My mother, Lady Eugenia, dismisses these events as fancy, Mr. Holmes," Sir Reginald said bitterly. "But I tell you this phantom wears my face, haunts my halls, and means to see me hanged." At this, Holmes's gaze sharpened. "How singular that she does not join you in seeking aid," he remarked, his tone cutting. "But no matter. You wish me to unmask this phantom? Before he succeeds in stealing my life entirely, already the magistrate mutters about arrest. If another sighting occurs—" Holmes held up a hand. "I shall wire Inspector Lestrade to delay any hasty conclusions," he said firmly. "We depart for Yorkshire on the evening train. Watson, if you would be so good as to pack your service revolver." As our client sagged in relief, I drew Holmes aside. "Surely you don't credit this doppelganger nonsense? The man is clearly unhinged," I said in a low voice. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured, plucking a single white hair from the back of Sir Reginald's coat. "Lamb's wool from a lady's shawl, unless I mistake my textiles. Our baronet has been embraced recently, and fervently, by a woman in mourning, yet he wears no wedding band. Curious, is it not? But the opium," I began, trying to press my doubts. "Ah, there we have the key," Holmes interrupted, his tone sharp with certainty. "The glove's odour is unmistakable, yet Sir Reginald's pupils show no sign of habitual use. The opium is not his, Watson, but someone's. A shadow is moving through Blackthorn Manor, a shadow with a face, and faces, as you know, are my specialty." With that he turned to our client, who sat staring into the fire, as though glimpsing his own funeral pyre within its flames. "Courage, Sir Reginald," Holmes said, his tone almost reassuring. "Phantoms fear the light of reason above all things. We shall illuminate yours." As the clock struck 4, the wind moaned down the chimney, and I found myself wondering whether it was indeed the weather that chilled me, or the slow, cold smile that had crept onto Sherlock Holmes's face, the smile that heralded the opening moves of a deadly game. Before departing for Yorkshire, Sir Reginald's horse, injured from the hard ride to Baker Street, was left tethered below in Mrs. Hudson's care, a small sacrifice for the sake of urgency and the unfolding mystery ahead. The Yorkshire moors, when we reached them by the evening train, lay swathed in a brooding twilight that seemed to leach the very colour from the world. The journey had been a silent one, Sir Reginald Blackthorne staring fixedly out the carriage window as though the clatter of the rails might drown the spectres haunting his mind. Sherlock Holmes, meanwhile, had buried himself in a sheaf of maps and local histories, his keen eyes darting over faded ink like a hound following a scent. Only when the jagged silhouette of Blackthorne Manor pierced the horizon did he stir, his gaze locking upon our client's suddenly ashen face. "You have not resided here since boyhood, I think," Holmes remarked, not as a question, but a statement. Sir Reginald started. "How could you know that?" he asked, his voice tinged with astonishment. "The way your fingers tighten on your knee at the sight of those battlements, the reflexive swallow, the dilation of the pupils," Holmes said evenly. "These are not the signs of homecoming, but of confrontation with a place of old dread." Our client's laugh held no mirth. "You see through men as others see through glass, Mr. Holmes," he said bitterly. "Yes, I was sent to boarding school at 8. My father passed away, and I seldom returned." The carriage lurched as we turned onto a narrow lane, the manor's crooked towers now looming above us like rotten teeth. A bitter wind keened across the heath, carrying the faint, iron tang of peat and decay. Even then I sensed a hostility in the land itself, the shadows pooling thickly about our wheels, the gnarled hawthorns clawing at the carriage as though the moors sought to repel our intrusion. We were met at the door by a woman who might have been a figure from some Gothic romance, pale as parchment, draped in a gown of unrelenting black, her silvered hair coiled tightly as a shroud about her skull. Lady Eugenia Blackthorne's eyes, however, burned with an intensity that belied her fragile frame. "Reginald," she said, her voice a rustle of dry leaves, "you bring strangers to our threshold at an hour most unconventional." Holmes swept his hat from his head with a courtly bow. "Your son's need is urgent, madam," he said politely. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We come to shed light where shadows gather." Her knuckles whitened on the doorframe. "There are no shadows here but those cast by nervous minds. Come in then if you must," she said curtly. The manor's interior proved as cheerless as its mistress. Our boots echoed through vaulted halls, hung with moth-eaten tapestries, past suits of armor whose empty visors seemed to track our progress. A fire had been lit in the great hall, but its feeble glow only emphasized the chill creeping from the stone walls. It was during this dismal tour that I made my discovery. Pausing in a long gallery lined with ancestral portraits, I noticed a peculiarity that stirred both my antiquarian interests and my sense of unease. One massive oil painting dominated the wall, a stern, bearded patriarch in Elizabethan ruff, his hand resting on the hilt of a sword. Beneath it hung a smaller, badly damaged canvas, its edges charred as though rescued from a fire. The subject appeared to be a boy of perhaps 12, his features eerily familiar. "The founder of the Blackthorne line," Sir Reginald muttered, noting my interest. "A pirate, they say, who built this house with blood money." "And this?" I asked, pointing to the scorched painting. Our client's face went slack. I don't recall," he stammered. "Edgar, 1865, Holmes read aloud, producing a magnifying glass to examine the crumbling pigment. "A relation?" Lady Eugenia materialized at our elbows like a wraith, her breath quick. "A servant's child," she said, dismissively. "The portrait was damaged in a nursery fire long ago. It should have been destroyed." "Yet here it remains," Holmes mused, tracing the boy's jawline with his lens. "Curious that the flames spared the face. One might almost think—" A crash from the hallway shattered the moment. A housemaid stood trembling amid shards of a fallen candelabra, her eyes wide as saucers. "I'm that sorry, m'lady. Only Only I thought I saw—" she began, haltingly, staring at Sir Reginald with undisguised terror. Holmes was upon her in 3 strides. "Saw what, girl?" he asked sharply. "Him, sir, standing right there in the passage. But when I turned, he weren't there no more," she exclaimed, trembling, looking towards Sir Reginald. Our host's brandy glass shattered against the hearth. "Lies! I've been here all the while," he cried indignantly. "Peace, Reginald," Lady Eugenia commanded, though her own hands fluttered like wounded birds. "The child is clearly overwrought. Mr. Holmes, you must excuse—" "Midnight," Holmes announced abruptly, consulting his watch. "The witching hour approaches, Watson. Let us see what phantoms this house conjures when honest men abed." The housemaid deposited us in separate chambers connected by a warped oak door, mine scarcely furnished, save for a sagging bed and washstand pocked with mildew. Through the thin wall I heard Holmes pacing his room, still fully dressed, I noted, his shadow occasionally blotting the sliver of light beneath our shared threshold. The scream came as the clock struck 12, a shrill, animal sound that brought us all bolt upright in our beds. Holmes, fully dressed, was at my door before the echoes faded. "The stables!" he snapped urgently, snatching up his stick. We found the maid, Molly, collapsed in the courtyard, her face blanched by moonlight. "It was him!" she sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Sir Reginald, who arrived moments later, clutching a dressing gown about him. I saw his face plain as day at the stable door. Then he vanished like smoke, she exclaimed. Holmes dropped to one knee, examining the mud. 2 sets of footprints, the girl's and a man's in riding boots, he said firmly. His lantern beam caught Sir Reginald's slippered feet. "Yours, sir! These are the only boots I own!" our client cried, near hysterical now. "Yet here we have a perfect imprint," Holmes murmured, measuring the tread with his tape. "Size 11, I should say, with a distinctive crack across the left heel. Tell me, Lady Eugenia, does the manor keep a guest register?" The old woman drew herself up, her voice trembling, with forced composure. "We are not in the habit of entertaining, Mr. Holmes. Now, if you will excuse me, I must attend to this poor child," she said dismissively. As she led the weeping maid inside, Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming with that cold, intellectual fire I knew so well. "Mark the bootprint, Watson. Our phantom leaves tangible traces, and where there are traces, there's a trail," I finished. "Precisely. But to what end?" he murmured, staring up at the manor's brooding bulk, where a single light now burned in an upper window. Twice in one night the double appears, yet always beyond reach. We are being tested, old friend, and I mean to pass. Holmes, our phantom's face requires no mirror, Watson. It is etched here in oils and ash, he stated. A sudden clatter from the gallery above froze us both. Holmes sprinted up the stairs, but found only a displaced suit of armor and a single white rose lying beneath the burnt painting, its petals still dewy with sap. "A calling card," Holmes murmured, twirling the bloom beneath his nose. "The same variety grows in Lady Eugenia's private garden." "How singular," he noted. That night, as wind rattled the casements, I took up vigil in my room, revolver close at hand. Sleep, when it came, brought troubled dreams of identical faces laughing in smoke until a hand shook me awake. Holmes stood over me, his face lit by urgent excitement. "The portrait, Watson!" "The date. It's wrong," he exclaimed. But before he could explain, a woman's scream tore through the house, a sound that propelled us both into the darkened hall where fresh horrors awaited. The scream that tore through Blackthorn Manor's corridors that night led us not to some fresh horror, but to the library where Lady Eugenia stood rigid before a gaping hole in the wainscoting. A hidden compartment, pried open with brutal haste, lay bare its secrets, a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, and a locket containing a miniature of a woman whose features mirrored Sir Reginald's own. Holmes, ever swift to seize upon evidence, snatched the journal and flipped to an entry dated July 12th, 1855, reading aloud in tones that cut through the shadows like a blade. My dearest Eleanor perished this night, leaving me a son whose visage bears the mark of her final agony. The physicians insist the child is unfit to live, his mind as fractured as the vial of laudanum that slipped from her hand. I have ordered him sent to St. Crispin's Asylum, where God may show him mercy. I cannot. Sir Reginald, his face ashen, staggered into a chair. Eleanor, she was my stepmother, but father always said, he began, his voice trailing off, that she died of fever when you were a boy. Holmes finished, his eyes darting across the pages. A convenient fiction. Your stepmother perished in childbirth. This child, he tapped, an entry dated 1865. Edgar has been lost to fire. Let the record show I had but one son. Curious phrasing for a grieving father, Holmes remarked, his voice laden with suspicion. Lady Eugenia's breath came in shallow rasps. Lies, all lies, she muttered, her gaze fixed on the floor. Are they? Holmes produced the charred portrait from his pocket, holding it beside Sir Reginald's face. Twin pairs of storm-grey eyes stared back. A servant's child, you claimed, yet here we have a boy who shares not only the Blackthorn brow, but the birthmark behind the right ear, a singular inheritance, would you not agree, Watson? I examined the painting's unburned portion. Indisputably familial, I said firmly. Then I must away to London, Holmes announced abruptly, snapping the journal shut. The roots of this poison tree lie in St. Crispin's ashes. Watson, remain vigilant. Our phantom grows impatient. 3 days later, Holmes returned in the guise of a grizzled seaman, his face smudged with coal dust and his breath reeking of gin. I found him in the Manor's disused conservatory, scrubbing his hands with carbolic soap. St. Crispin's, burned in 78, he said, without preamble, but its record survived in the care of a certain Mr. Josiah Quigley, a former orderly now haunting Limehouse's opium dens. You spoke with him? I asked curiously. Persuaded him, Holmes corrected, donning his frock coat. The man proved remarkably forthcoming once reminded of his military desertion charges. Edgar Blackthorne was indeed committed in 1855, diagnosed with moral insanity. But in 1865, the asylum's fire provided convenient cover for his disappearance, he explained with a grim tone. Presumed dead, I murmured thoughtfully. Presumed absent. Quigley recalled a gentleman paying handsomely to have the boy's corpse unrecorded. Our young Edgar resurfaced years later as a dockhand, boasting drunkenly of noble blood before vanishing again. Holmes paused, extracting a water-stained pamphlet from his satchel, an 1883 broadsheet advertising a travelling circus. A face circled in ink stopped my breath. The amazing Proteus, master of disguise. Edgar's tutelage in theatrical arts, Holmes said grimly. He honed his mimicry in carnival tents before returning to claim his birthright. But one question remains. Who preserved his childhood portrait? Who kept the embers of his existence smouldering in this house? We found Lady Eugenia at her late husband's escritoire, quills scratching across the vellum. She did not look up as Holmes placed the burnt portrait before her. You knew, he said softly. Knew your late husband's son lived, knew he would return. The quills snapped in her fingers. I protected my child. Reginald was but 3 when I wed his father. What mother would not fight for her son's inheritance? She retorted, her voice trembling with defiance. "Even by condemning Edgar to madness?" Holmes asked, leaning closer. "Madness?" Her laugh rang hollow. "Edgar was a demon cradled in Eleanor's womb. At 6, he stabbed a maid with her own hatpin. At 10, he burned the nursery. When the asylum took him, this house knew peace for the first time in decades," she said, bitterly. Holmes's gaze narrowed. "Yet you preserved his image. Why?" Tears splattered the parchment. "His eyes. They followed me from the flames. I thought to keep it as proof, should the day ever come," she whispered. Holmes stepped closer, his voice ablade. "Come, Lady Eugenia, proof implies anticipation. You feared Edgar's return long before this night," he said incisively. The dowager's composure crumbled. "He wrote to me after my husband's death. Threats failed as pleas, a son's rightful inheritance, he called it. I sent money, hoping to quiet him," she admitted, her voice breaking. A crash echoed from below, followed by the acrid tang of burning oil. Holmes flung open the door. "Your silence fed the fire, madam? Now it consumes you." The east wing blazed like a pagan pyre, flames licking at ancestral portraits. Through the smoke, a figure emerged, Sir Reginald's mirror image, laughing as he tossed a lit oil lamp into the library. "Edgar!" Holmes roared, plunging after the vanishing shape. Chaos reigned. Bucket lines formed and collapsed as timbers groaned. I dragged Sir Reginald from his bedchamber, the baronet screaming, "Let me die! He wants the house. Let him have its bones." Holmes reappeared at dawn, his coat singed, clutching a scrap of velvet curtain. "He fled into the mire," he panted, "but not before leaving this." The fabric bore a hastily scrawled message in phosphorescent paint, glowing faintly in the twilight. "The heir requires a crown." "The game quickens, Watson," Holmes murmured, staring at the moors where mist coiled like waiting serpents. "Our adversary has played his childhood terrors against us. Now we must answer with the one weapon he lacks, brotherhood." As the household staggered through the ashes, I noted Holmes pocket a fragment of the circus broadsheet, his face etched with cold resolve. Somewhere beyond the scorched fields, a horse whinnied in the fog, a sound that might have been a challenge or a lament. Chapter 3. Chains of Blood, Chains of Fate. The aftermath of the fire hung over Blackthorn Manor like a shroud, the acrid scent of charred timbers permeating every draughty corridor. It was in this atmosphere of smouldering tension that Holmes convened a clandestine meeting in the estate's disused chapel, its stained glass saints casting fractured hues over Sir Reginald's ashen face. "The time has come," Holmes declared, placing a mahogany case upon the altar, "to let your phantom claim his prize." With the flourish of a stage magician, he revealed a waxen effigy, a death mask of such chilling realism that I momentarily questioned whether our client's head had indeed been replaced. Sir Reginald recoiled, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the waxen effigy. "That looks exactly like me," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Merely to simulate the condition," Holmes corrected, and explaining, "Meanwhile, Watson and I shall propagate rumors of your sudden demise through the village inns, a task made easier by your recent notoriety." The baronet's protestations were quelled by Holmes's icy logic. Holmes replied calmly, "Consider, sir, your adversary's entire design hinges upon becoming you. What greater lure than an empty throne?" 2 nights later, I found myself in the manor's subterranean crypt, the effigy laid out in an open casket, its waxen face gleaming pallid in the lantern light. Sir Reginald was safely hidden elsewhere, while his corpse, a waxen effigy, wore his signature emerald cravat pin, the same baited relic found clasped in Briggs's dead hand. Above ground, Mrs. Crowe, the manor's head housemaid, played the role of grieving housekeeper, her mournful wails echoing through the flues. Holmes had schooled her in the theatrics of loss, but her anguish needed no artifice. Her brother, the late groundskeeper Jem, had been Edgar's first victim. "The stage is set," Holmes whispered, concealing himself behind a marble effigy of some long-dead blackthorn. "Keep your revolver handy, Watson. Our phantom prefers knives, but desperation breeds improvisation." The hours crept by, marked by the drip of subterranean seepage and the skittering of rat claws on stone. At midnight, the iron door creaked ajar. Footfalls echoed, a measured tread that paused by the casket. Moonlight through a high grate revealed Sir Reginald's face peering down at its waxen twin, a cruel smile twisting familiar features. "Sleep well, brother," came a voice both alien and intimate, as the figure leaned over the casket, his hands trembling slightly as he touched the cravat pin on the effigy's chest, inspecting it with suspicion. I cocked my revolver. The attack was swift, a pantherine pounce onto the effigy, Edgar's hands pressing against its chest and face in a desperate attempt to confirm its authenticity. As the wax head shifted slightly under his touch, Holmes sprang from the shadows, his walking stick connecting with the assailant's wrist in a crack of bone. "Checkmate, Mr. Edgar Blackthorne," Holmes exclaimed, his voice cold and cutting. The ensuing struggle was brief, but savage. Our adversary fought with the feral strength of the damned, teeth snapping at Holmes's forearm until my pistol barrel pressed against his temple stilled him. "A convincing likeness," Holmes remarked, pinning the man's arms. But even Proteus must breathe. With a violent wrench, he tore away a latex nose and cheek pieces, revealing a face that drew gasps from the crypt's new arrivals, Sir Reginald and Lady Eugenia, supported by another housemaid. "Edgar," the old woman whispered, collapsing against a sarcophagus. "Oh, God, what have I done?" She sobbed faintly. The captive threw back his head and laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Mother finally speaks truth. Tell them how you paid the asylum keepers to forget me," he demanded, his tone venomous. Holmes tightened his grip. "Your extortion failed, sir. Lady Eugenia's ledgers show regular withdrawals since 1880. Conscience money or blackmail?" he asked icily. "Blood money," Edgar spat. "She thought to buy my silence, but I've come for my birthright." Sir Reginald staggered forward, tears streaming down his face, his expression crumbling under the weight of the revelations. "All this because father wronged you?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Wronged me?" Edgar's voice rose to a shriek. "I was first born, the true heir. While you dined on silver, I ate rats in St. Crispin's cellar. While you learned the quadrille, I learned which arteries bleed longest." He lunged against Holmes's hold, eyes wild. "This house is mine by right of suffering." It was then that Lady Eugenia's confession spilled forth, a torrent of guilt and fear. How Edgar's letters began arriving after her husband's death, threatening exposure. How she'd sent money, hoping to placate him. How the fire at St. Crispin's had been no accident, but a youth's first act of arson. "I sought to protect Reginald," she quavered, clutching her rosary, "to preserve his inheritance." "By preserving me?" Edgar sneered. "Dear stepmamma knew I lived. That portrait she accidentally saved." His laughter echoed through the vaults. "A reminder that madness runs in the blood." Holmes stepped between Edgar and the cowering Lady Eugenia, his voice steel wrapped in velvet. "Madness is a poor alibi for malice, sir. Your theatre of cruelty closes tonight." With a practiced twist, he secured Edgar's wrists in irons retrieved from the crypt wall. "The constables come within the hour. Until then, you may contemplate which face you'll wear to the gallows, the wronged heir or the common cutthroat." As the captive spat curses, Holmes turned to Watson, his eyes flinty. "Observe the restraints, Doctor. Note the craftsmanship. These shackles held Blackthorn pirates in the age of Elizabeth. Fitting, is it not, that they now cage their descendant?" As constables led the raving impostor away, Holmes retrieved a curious object from the crypt floor. A circus ticket stub dated 1879, its edges singed. "The final touch," he murmured. "No actor discards his playbills." Sir Reginald stared at the effigy's ruined face. "Will he hang?" "The law demands it," Holmes replied simply. "And what does justice demand, Mr. Holmes?" asked Reginald, his voice low. For once, the great detective had no answer. Dawn found us in the Manor's gun room, cataloguing Edgar's arsenal of disguise, wigs of varying hues, spirit gum, a costumer's ledger from Madame Tussaud's. Holmes paused at a child's primer, its flyleaf inscribed "To Edgar, from Mamma." "Observe the handwriting," he noted, comparing it to Lady Eugenia's letters. The same angular M she visited him taught him, even as she plotted his erasure. "A tortured conscience," I ventured. "Or insurance?" Holmes's face hardened. "She preserved that portrait not from guilt, Watson, but as leverage. Edgar was always her son's shadow, a weapon to be deployed should Reginald prove unsatisfactory." He paused, his tone growing sharper. "And yet Lady Eugenia's actions are far from just. Mark my words, Watson. After we are done dealing with Edgar, she will face the justice she has long evaded." A shrill arrival interrupted us, the hurried steps of a maid echoing through the hall. She burst into the room, her face pale and her voice trembling. "Mr. Holmes," she cried, "it's Edgar Blackthorne. He's escaped, overpowered a guard, they said, and was last seen heading toward Highmore Tor." "But the chains," I said, "were no match for a man raised in asylum irons," Holmes finished, already striding toward the gunroom. "His lifetime in shackles taught him more than poetry, Watson." Holmes's expression darkened as he turned to the maid, her words hanging in the air like a spectre. "The Moors," he said coldly, "will claim what the law could not." Somewhere beyond the blinded panes, a curlew's cry pierced the night, a sound uncannily like Edgar's laughter. The shrill cry of the jailer's whistle pierced the damp Yorkshire night, rousing Holmes and me from uneasy slumber in the Manor's guest chambers. Through the mullioned windows we glimpsed constables' lanterns bobbing like fireflies across the courtyard, their beams illuminating the sprawled form of a young officer clutching his bloodied temple. "The game is afoot, Watson!" Holmes exclaimed, throwing open the window as a rush of damp moorland air swept into the room, carrying the sharp tang of impending rain. Below, Lestrade's voice bellowed furiously. "He's escaped with Jarvis's pistol. That devil broke his shackles." We hurried to the great hall, where we found Sir Reginald pacing in agitation, his dressing-gown hanging loosely over his shoulders. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the empty portrait frame where Edgar's likeness had once loomed. "This is my doing," he muttered, his voice heavy with regret. "The blood calls to blood." Holmes scarcely paused to don his ulster. "Sentiment later, action now. Watson, fetch my field glass and the bull's-eye lantern. Sir Reginald, rouse your gamekeeper and the hounds." The pursuit began at the crumbling ruins of the old asylum, where Edgar's discarded shackles lay twisted beneath a toppled headstone. Two brindle bloodhounds strained at their leashes, their deep-throated baying echoing into the night. The gamekeeper, a grizzled veteran of the Afghan campaigns, knelt to inspect the disturbed ground, his practiced eye catching every detail. "He's heading for Highmore Tor," the man growled, pointing to a snapped bracken frond glistening with fresh sap. "It's the only shelter between here and the coast." Holmes crouched beside him, his magnifying lens catching the faint imprint of a bare foot in the moss. "Barefoot," he murmured. "The man scorned civilization to the last." As if in answer, a pistol shot cracked through the pre-dawn gloom, sending a startled curlew skyward. The hounds surged forward, their howls mingling with the rising wind as we gave chase. The moor transformed under a shroud of thick, clinging fog, spectral tendrils coiling about our ankles as we climbed the uneven terrain. Holmes led our grim procession, the bull's-eye lantern strapped to his chest casting a feeble, flickering beam through the murk. Behind us, Sir Reginald stumbled, his curses barely audible above the relentless howl of the wind. "Hold!" Holmes hissed suddenly, freezing us mid-stride. Through the spectral haze loomed the jagged crown of High Moor Tor, its granite outcrops like teeth gnawing at the low, scudding clouds. There, silhouetted against the weeping sky, stood Edgar. His borrowed constable's jacket flapped like a raven's wings, and the stolen revolver gleamed in his hand. "Come no closer!" he shouted, his voice rising above the gale. The wind twisted his words into a haunting echo. "I'll not dance on Blackthorn's gallows!" Holmes stepped forward with the cautious grace of a lion-tamer, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. "Your grievance is with history, not these good men. Put down the firearm, and we shall debate your birthright over brandy and cigars." Edgar's hollow laughter rang out, bouncing off the stones like the knell of a bell. "Debate?" he sneered. "What use is rhetoric to the twice-born?" With a trembling hand he tore open his shirt, revealing a livid scar seared into his chest, a crude bee burned into the flesh. "My father's brand!" he spat. "His welcome when I came knocking at his grave!" Sir Reginald clutched at my arm, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The mausoleum fire last winter—" "Silence, usurper!" Edgar snarled, levelling the pistol at his half-brother. "This Tor has seen Blackthorn blood spilled before. The old ones demand their tithe." As the hammer cocked, Holmes's hand dipped into his pocket. "Then let us pay in kind," he declared. With a conjurer's flourish, he hurled the bull's-eye lantern high into the air. The sudden flare illuminated the moor in a burst of blinding light, piercing the fog and stunning our quarry. In that frozen instant I charged, adrenaline propelling me forward. My years of service surged to life as I collided with Edgar, sending us both tumbling across the rain-slicked stone. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the heather, and we grappled in the mud. "The name dies with me," Edgar rasped, his teeth snapping perilously close to my neck. A glint of steel caught my eye, the ancestral dagger from the manor's hall, its obsidian hilt etched with pagan runes. Holmes's cane descended like a thunderbolt, striking Edgar's wrist with unerring precision. The blade clattered to the ground, spinning into the void as we struggled near the Tor's crumbling edge. Below us the fog parted momentarily, revealing the jagged rocks waiting below. "Yield!" Holmes commanded, pinning Edgar's thrashing form with the strength of grim determination. Edgar's laughter curdled the mist. "You cannot kill a ghost, Mr. Holmes. I am the first son, the true—" His defiance ended in a wet gasp as Sir Reginald lunged from the shadows, fists flying. "Murderer! Defiler!" he roared, his voice raw with anguish. The brothers toppled, a snarling tangle of shared blood and mutual hatred. Holmes and I dragged them apart, but not before Edgar's temple struck an outcrop with a sickening crunch. "Watson, the field dressing!" Holmes barked. I knelt in the heather, my hand steady despite the chaos, and stanched the bleeding wound as Holmes administered smelling salts. Edgar's eyes fluttered open briefly, his gaze unfocused, but landing on Sir Reginald's tear-streaked face. "Father's first," he gurgled before slipping into unconsciousness. Lestrade and his constables arrived moments later, bearing Edgar away on a stretcher, his wrists shackled to the frame despite his limp state. "York Prison's infirmary will mend that skull," Lestrade growled, "and its cells will hold what the moors could not." Dawn broke sullen and grey as we descended from the Tor, our grim burden in tow. At the edge of the moor, Holmes paused, his eyes fixed on the dagger he had recovered from the Tor's base. "Observe the inscription," he murmured, tracing the eroded Norse runes with a gloved finger. "Bloodbinds, blood blinds." "A family motto," I ventured. "A warning," Holmes replied, his gaze lingering on the Tor where ravens now circled. "The Blackthorn curse was never spectral, Watson, merely the eternal return of sins long buried." As we trudged back to the manor, the first drops of rain began to fall, washing away the blood that stained Sir Reginald's clenched fists. Chapter 4. The Hollow Crown of Blackthorn. The morning after Edgar's capture dawned with a brittle clarity, sunlight piercing Blackthorn Manor's leaded windows like shards of glass. Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves once more in the Manor's oak-panelled library, where motes of dust swirled in the amber light, as though the very air hummed with the weight of unresolved truths. A squat, frog-faced solicitor named Mr. Throckmorton had arrived from York. His battered dispatch box clutched like a holy reliquary, its contents poised to unravel the Blackthorn lineage's darkest secret. "I understand there's been some dispute regarding succession," the man wheezed, mopping his brow with a puce handkerchief. From the shadows, Lady Eugenia emitted a stifled sob, her black crepe veil trembling. Holmes strode to the mantelpiece, his finger tracing a fissure in the carved overmantel. "Your firm handled the late Lord Blackthorn's affairs, did it not, including the disposition of his first marriage?" Throckmorton's jowls quivered. "I am bound by client confidentiality." "Bound tighter by the hangman's noose." Holmes's voice cracked like a whip. He depressed a hidden catch in the woodwork, releasing a panel beneath the hearthstone. From the cavity, he withdrew a parchment scroll, sealed with crumbling crimson wax. A will dated 1865, concealed behind a false brick in the chimney. How came you to overlook it during probate? The solicitor turned corpse grey. "That document is inoperative." "Is it?" Holmes cracked the seal with surgical precision. "Behold, Lord Alaric Blackthorn's final testament, acknowledging Edgar as legitimate heir, born of his lawful wife Eleanor, née Voss." He passed the document to Sir Reginald, whose hands shook as he read aloud. "To my firstborn son, Edgar Alaric Blackthorn, I bequeath title, lands, and entailed properties." Lady Eugenia's cane clattered against the floorboards. "A dead letter. The boy was declared mad, his rights forfeit. By whose hand?" Holmes pinned her with a hawk's gaze. "The Court of Chancery never ruled on competence. You and your husband merely let the world forget." Throckmorton squirmed. "Technically, the entail remains valid. However, Holmes interjected, "no court in England would award estates to a murderer. Legal legitimacy cannot cleanse blood-stained hands." He fixed Sir Reginald with a look of grim compassion. "The title is yours, sir, but the victory comes at a heavy cost." At dusk, we found Lady Eugenia in the chapel crypt, kneeling before the Blackthorn mausoleum. The scent of extinguished candles clung to the chill air. "I shall take the veil at St. Hilda's," she murmured without turning. "The sisters welcome penitents." Sir Reginald reached toward her, then let his hand fall. "Mother." "I don't deserve to be called your mother," she said, her voice heavy with remorse. "I have killed Edgar. In every way that matters, I destroyed him." Holmes cleared his throat. The stable hand's murder. Edgar's left-handed thrust, was it not? The wound's downward angle betrayed him. She nodded absently. He favoured his left even as a child. I burnt his left-handed gloves, tried to beat it out of him. A spectral smile twisted her lips. Some curses persist. Later in the study, Holmes assembled his final proofs upon a claw-footed table, the dagger from the tour, Edgar's circus broadsheet, and a pair of gloves mismatched by handedness. "Observe, Watson," he said, positioning 2 wax tapers to cast opposing shadows. Briggs's mortal wound descended sharply from right collarbone to left rib, a trajectory impossible for a right-handed man of Sir Reginald's height. Only a left-handed assailant standing on the hayloft ladder could strike thus. I examined his diagram, but the magistrate never noted this. Because rural constabularies measure guilt by resemblance, not reason, yet the truth lingered in plain sight, like Lady Eugenia's portrait, or that telltale boot-print with its cracked heel. Sir Reginald entered, bearing a decanter of ancient brandy. His eyes lingered on the dagger. "He hated me before we met. Is that possible?" "Hate requires no introduction," Holmes replied softly. "Merely a narrative. Your mother provided that in abundance. At dawn's first light, we stood at the manor gates as a nun's carriage bore Lady Eugenia into the mist. Sir Reginald watched until the vehicle vanished, then pressed a velvet pouch into Holmes's hand. "The Blackthorn emeralds, your fee," said Reginald. Holmes recoiled as though offered poison. "Keep your jewels, sir. This house has bartered enough in human flesh." As our train pulled from the station, I glimpsed Sir Reginald through the window, a solitary figure before the charred east wing, head bowed beneath the weight of empty victory. A tragedy of Greek proportions, I mused. Holmes stared at the receding moors and said, "More Shakespearean, I think. The sins of the father visited upon sons both true and false." He then drew Edgar's primer from his coat, its pages falling open to a childish scrawl. "Papa comes tomorrow." The words hung between us as the engine's whistle mourned across the heath, a requiem for brothers unborn and battles unwon. The Yorkshire moors lay behind us, swallowed by the creeping mist as our train clattered southward toward London. Sherlock Holmes sat motionless in the compartment corner, his profile etched against the grimy window, eyes fixed on the fading horizon where Blackthorn Manor's jagged silhouette had once loomed. I watched him, this man of steel springs and precision, and marveled at the unspoken weight that now seemed to bow his hawkish frame. "A singular case, Watson," he remarked abruptly, as though plucking the thought from the damp air. "Two faces, one soul, or none at all." I stirred from my reverie. "You uncovered the truth, Holmes. Justice, however bitter, prevails," I said, attempting to reassure him. "Justice?" His laugh was a dry rasp. "We have merely swept the stage for the next act." "Heredity is a playwright who never discards a manuscript," he replied. He drew Edgar's charred primer from his coat, its brittle pages whispering secrets as he flipped them. "Observe the marginalia, a child's hand, tracing the Blackthorn crest over and over. Not aspiration, Watson, recognition." The train plunged into a tunnel, plunging us into momentary darkness. When light returned, Holmes's face was a mask of shadow. "What torments me," he murmured, "is not the cruelty of the game, but its elegance. Edgar's entire existence, a perfect counterpoint to his brother's, had their positions been reversed." The wheel's rhythmic clack filled his pause. I thought of Sir Reginald standing alone in his ravaged hall, heir to nothing but ghosts, and shivered. Baker Street welcomed us with drizzle and the warm glow of familiarity. Mrs. Hudson, bless her steadfast soul, met us at the door with a tray of lapsang souchong and a reproachful cluck at our mud-spattered boots. "A message came an hour past, Mr. Holmes," she said, nodding toward the hall table, where a folded note lay like an unquiet spirit. "Marked urgent. The lad delivering it said it's bad news from Yorkshire." Holmes picked up the note, unfolding it with the precision of a surgeon. His sharp intake of breath told me all. "Lestrade," he said, passing the paper to me. "Edgar Blackthorne found hanged in cell, used buckle from stolen belt. Last words scrawled on wall. The face in the mirror was always his. Further instructions required," I read aloud, the weight of the message settling heavily in my chest. "Madness to the last," I said. "Or clarity?" Holmes moved to the fire, the edge of the note curling in the flames. "Consider the phrasing. Not my face, but the face," as though he finally recognized the mask beneath the skin. The clock's pendulum swung its metronomic beat as Holmes sank into his armchair, steepling his fingers. Outside, a newsboy's cry, "Suicide in Yorkshire!" drifted through the fog. "You anticipated this?" I ventured. "I anticipated resolution," he said, his voice holding an uncharacteristic edge. "Yet the final stroke eludes me still. Why that phrase? Why the mirror?" I recalled the gauntlet of portraits in Blackthorne's gallery, generations of grey eyes staring through time. Perhaps he saw his father's cruelty in every reflection, his own, Sir Reginald's, or recognized the cruelest truth of all, that he and his brother were mere facets of the same cursed stone, Holmes said, plucking his violin from its case, the bow hovering over the strings. "The Moors keep their secrets, Watson, but not from us." A discordant note shivered through the room as he played, a gypsy air, mournful and unresolved. I watched the note's ashes curl in the grate, Edgar's final words reduced to smoke and conjecture. Later, as I chronicled these events, I paused at the question Holmes left hanging in the air, like the man himself. Can a life forged in betrayal ever reflect anything but distortion? The looking glass shows what it is shown, yet Edgar's last act twisted even this truth. We never learned which brother's face he saw in the end. Holmes, ever pragmatic, dismissed the case as a trifle of mirrors and morphine, yet I noted he kept Edgar's burnt portrait pinned above his desk. One fog-draped evening as we sat by the fire, I remarked on its presence. Holmes merely stirred his tea. "A reminder, Watson, evil wears many faces, but seldom its own," he said. The clock struck 12. The case was closed. It was some weeks after the case of the Blackthorne phantom had faded from the headlines, replaced by fresher scandals, but for me, its spectres lingered still. Holmes, as ever, had buried himself in work, his sharp mind leaping from ciphers to chemical experiments with the agility of a cat at play. Yet I had seen the shadow in his eyes, the weight he carried, though he would never admit it. A letter arrived that evening, its envelope plain save for a Yorkshire postmark. Holmes, engrossed in a monograph on the uses of coal tar derivatives, handed it to me with a nod. "No doubt from Sir Reginald," he remarked absently. "Read it aloud, Watson, if you please." Breaking the seal, I unfolded the single sheet and began to read. "Dear Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson, I write to you with the heaviness of a man who has seen the world's worst shadows and the faint glimmers of light that pierce them. Blackthorne Manor is, at last, quiet. The east wing remains a charred ruin, as it must always be, a fitting monument to the sins of my family. Yet in that silence I have found clarity, if not peace. Your deductions have unearthed truths I dared not face. My brother Edgar, though a stranger to me in life, has become a haunting presence in my thoughts. I see him now not as the villain I once believed, but as a man shaped and broken by the choices of others. In his final days, he wrote to me, though I was unaware until after his death. His letter, found among his few belongings, is enclosed. I share it with you both, not out of duty, but out of something I cannot quite name, perhaps a desire to understand or to be understood. I leave Blackthorn Manor tomorrow, bound for the continent. This house, with all its grandeur, has become a prison. Yet I carry with me the hope that, through distance and time, I might learn to live not as a Blackthorn, but as a man. Yours in gratitude, Sir Reginald Blackthorn. I paused, the letter trembling in my hands. Holmes, who had laid down his monograph, gestured silently for me to read Edgar's letter. Its paper was crumpled, the ink smeared in places, but the words rang clear. To my brother Reginald, though I doubt you'll read this, I write it none the less. What is a man, if not the stories he tells himself? Mine is a tale of fire and ash, written by hands not my own. Yet as the end draws near, I see now that I have worn too many masks and forgotten my true face. You were the sunlit child, Reginald, the heir, the favourite. I was the shadow cast by that light, shaped by the cold walls of St. Crispin's, the jeers of men who called me beast and devil. Did I hate you for it? At times, but more than hate, I envied you. Not for your title or wealth, but for the love you were given so freely, the love I could only imagine. The fire in the East Wing was my answer to a world that denied me. I burned the past, hoping to rise from its ashes. Yet in the end, I see that fire consumes everything, even the hand that wields it. Do you know why I wore your face? It was not just revenge, it was a plea. I wanted you to see me, not as the monster, but as the brother who might have been. In that mirror, perhaps we might have found each other. But mirrors are cruel things. They show only the surface, never the depths. My death will be my final performance. Do not weep for me, Reginald. My part was written long ago, and I have played it to its bitter end. But do not let it be the end of yours. Take the stage now, and live as I could not. Farewell, Edgar. The room fell silent as I finished. Outside, the London fog crept along Baker Street, muffling the sounds of the city. Holmes stared into the fire, his features etched with an expression I could not quite place, a blend of sorrow, understanding, and something deeper, almost primal. At last, the truth, he murmured, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Not in deductions or proofs, but in the heart of the matter. The man sought recognition, Watson, not wealth, not vengeance, only the acknowledgement of his existence. I sat back, the weight of the letter settling in my chest. And yet it came too late, I said. Even as he reached out, he was already lost. Holmes nodded, his gaze distant. A tragedy, in every sense of the word. Edgar was both victim and villain, shaped by forces beyond his control. And Sir Reginald, he now bears the burden of survival, of understanding. That, I think, is the cruelest justice of all. We sat in silence for a time, the crackle of the fire the only sound. At last, Holmes stirred, rising to retrieve a thin package from his desk drawer. Unwrapping it, he revealed the charred fragment of Edgar's childhood portrait. I kept this, he said simply, placing it on the mantel. Not as a reminder of the case, but of the faces we wear, and the ones we hide. He turned to me, his expression inscrutable. Tell me, Watson, do you believe redemption is possible, even in the shadow of such darkness? I considered the question, my thoughts returning to Edgar's letter, to the tormented soul it revealed. Perhaps, I said at last, if not in life, then in the memories of those who remain. Perhaps that is enough. Holmes inclined his head, his sharp features softened by the firelight. A comforting thought, my friend, he said. Let us hope it is true. And with that, he returned to his violin, drawing forth a mournful melody that echoed through the fog-bound streets. The notes lingered like ghosts, a requiem not only for Edgar Blackthorne, but for the brotherhood that might have been, and the shadows that will forever haunt the moors. Thank you for tuning in to Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more captivating detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive.